thank you. That's much appreciated.
Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you. Testing. All right, cool. Svan, can you say something so we can see if we can hear you all right?
Absolutely. Can you guys hear me?
All right, cool. Looks like we're back on track. So if those of you that read lips might have saw me say that I hope we got our tech issues figured out. We do not, but I think we're getting closer. I know that producer Nick is putting in a lot of effort on that. We really appreciate it. So yeah, this week we're, as usual, being live broadcast on YouTube, Twitter, Entropy, VK, Odyssey, Rumble, and for the first time this week we are on Twitch as well. I appreciate everyone who donates and does any of that during the program. It goes to the great things that we are trying to do as the AFA, that we are accomplishing as the AFA, and we can only accomplish them with y'all's generosity. So thank you very much. If you want to participate in any of the fun little bells and whistles and such, the links for that are in the description, I believe. And any other questions on it, I'm sure producer Nick can answer those for you. We are having... This is the second to last of our episodes focusing on the Elder Futhark runes. So just be aware, it's been nice, and we'll, keep having Svan on every other week. We're just going to figure out something different to pivot to when we're done with the runes here. That said, think of any top of the show news that folks need to know. Next week, for the first time, barring any flight delays or technical difficulties, Victory Never Sleeps will be broadcast from on the road in Tennessee. We are going to be at Sigerheim next weekend. So the final weekend of this month, we will be at Sigerheim for celebrating Winter Nights. It's going to be very exciting. We've got a lot of great people showing up. Both Svan and myself and Nick are going to be there. So it should be a great weekend. I'm really looking forward to it, and I would love to share that experience with all of you guys. So if you are able to do that, that would be great. We'd love to see you. Reach out to your local folk builder and let's make it happen. Also coming up is going to be Feast of the Einherjar in South Dakota. And I'm sure Nick got a graphic for us on that. It's too small for me to see, but the weekend of
November 9th through 12th.
Here we go, 9th through 12th. If you guys can make that, that would be awesome. I'm going to be out there. I believe the McNallans will be out there as well. So we would love to see you there. Again, reach out to your local folk builder or any of the folk builders, and we can get you squared away. It's going to be a nice event. We'd love to have you there. I think that's what we've got for right now. Svan, could you start us off this evening talking about the rune Ehwaz for folks that have never heard of it before?
Yeah, absolutely. This rune is titled Ehwaz. H. There's some interesting things about this rune and the next rune. First and foremost, this rune is not in the younger Futhark. It is in the Anglo-Saxon, and it is in the obviously the Elder. But the true meaning of this rune really comes from the Anglo-Saxon rune poem. The names are, of course, the Ehwaz is a reconstructed name from the Gothic name Ehwaz with an I, just I, yeah, it's Ihwaz. And the Anglo-Saxon is Ao or simply. And all of them mean different things in slight variation. Some are referring to a stallion, others are referring to a horse. The way that a lot of people, I try to tell them that they could really equate this to the horse is understanding like the Latin word for horse, equus or equestrian, has the same root as this meaning. But we have a lot of different words for horse. We have stallion, mare, and lots of things like that. So it's worth noting that if people are like, how does this mean horse? That's really the best way to root it is in the linguistics of understanding equus or equestrian. This rune is also truly interesting because in the Elder Futhark, it starts the two that are really known for their basically double stem, and they're often mixed up and confused because they're so similar in shape. But this symbology generally represents the legs of the horse and the saddle in between, or the resting saddle. Sometimes there's variations of it where it's even just the middle part is flattened out. But the overall meaning of this rune is unification through corrective action, generally through teamwork. And this is symbolized predominantly through the horse and rider and the dynamic of this rune. I think ultimately has connections to kind of being a multiplier rune. And I think that's very interesting that it comes after Berkano. So we have, as if for those that were tuned in 2 weeks ago, and we talked about the coming of the age of Tiwaz as an epoch or as a movement, and then after Tiwaz there is the encapsulation and the birthing or the germination of the seed and the fruitfulness of life to come. This rune, I think, also coincides with that there is a time of great movement, unification, a sense of everyone moving in one direction. It's not necessarily like Mannaz in the sense that it's about community. It's about what it takes to make community. So again, very, very interesting that it comes at following in such auspicious rune set. This rune in divination throws people off, sometimes because they don't exactly know what it correlates to. And I would say that any sort of, whether it's light or dark, it's always talking about the unification of forces and whether or not they're working well together. So it can, in a good sense, it could mean that you have found a new person to make alliance with, you have found a person to work with, or you have found a mode in which you can achieve your goals that's perhaps like a horse, where it's able to take you further than you thought you could just on your own work. In a negative sense, it could mean that there's things falling apart, that there are components to your whatever your question is. The components of your question might be falling apart and causing things to as far as Stavr or rune tines, this rune is and I have always used it this way as a multiplier rune, a passage to carry runes forward, to amplify their ultimate goals. It's kind of like the slingshot or the rail system in order to really project the rune into the willful manifestation. So it's deeply connected to teamwork, and that is what ultimately I believe the Ehwaz, the horse rune, as it's referred to, is all about.
Yeah, trying to think of what to add. I think that Svan covered it pretty well. One thing to consider on it is it's not it's not just about the horse as a concept. It's about the horse as a mount. It's about the horse as a with. I don't want to just say tool of, because it's not that. It's a partnership between man and beast to be something more, to accomplish something more. The horse and rider are something more than the horse by themselves, or than the man by himself. Man upon a horse becomes something different. That's the very root of European warrior aristocracy, is the warrior that isn't just a warrior by himself. He's a warrior that gets up on a horse, and all of a sudden that's something special. That was special from Roman times all the way into, we see the knight at the height of the Middle Ages. Special, that was the Middle Ages. And it does have to do with the partnership. I think there's also a greater truth that is expressed in it. That it is, the man rides the horse doesn't ride the man. The idea of the willful astral self riding atop the more bestial, primal parts of man's nature. They're both good, they're both important, but the nobility and the will has to ride upon the primal and the primal and the lusty and the chthonic. And I think there's something to that. I think certainly we see that throughout Western esoteric tradition, through Hermeticism and other things. It's a recurring theme, because I think it's a truth that our people have known since old times. Nick, could you go ahead and throw up that rune poem for us? I forget that the screen that I'm looking on is real tiny. So cool. The horse is a joy to princes in the presence of warriors. A steed in the pride is the pride of. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to look at this on a different screen because I am unable to see it. Actually, Svan, could you go ahead and read it for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. The horse is a joy to princes in the presence of warriors, a steed in the pride of its hooves. When rich men on horseback bandy words about, and it is ever a source of comfort to the restless. Sorry, I had to move my camera a little bit there.
No, that's good. I appreciate you for the assist there. I think that's pretty straightforward. I think that it it encapsulates a lot of what Svan said, and he in his rundown of it even mentioned that this gives the meaning of it in a pretty straightforward way. One of the things that I think is I don't know, just to further illustrate the point, is how special that a horse, a fine steed, is to princes among warriors, because it elevates a warrior to be a whole class better or different. It literally elevates them, but it makes them a powerful force of that combination of things. And people have recognized that since forever. I think that Svan's talk about this rune being one of enhancing other runes or carrying them forward or empowering them, I think is very spot on. And I think it speaks a lot to that idea of partnership, of an ordered partnership. And that's what I've got on this one. We've got a few questions lining up.
And I do have a couple of things.
Please.
One is, we were talking about the epochs of time, and I had made reference to the idea of the epoch of the sun, or Sowilo, and transitioning into the epoch of Tiwaz. There is, and I can't speak for it because, again, now we're getting into the idea of like prophetics, but there was kind of a message that I think my rune master taught me, was the hearkening of twins. And again, when I was told this, I didn't know what to make of it, whether we're talking about mythic language, whether we're talking about literalism. But at the same time, again, we're kind of shifting into a time where there's going to be a temple to Tyr erected. And the significance of this temple is, I would say, more than just a temple itself, but there's also a lot more added to it. So about 10 to 8 years ago, I would think of a lot of conjecture, but now I'm starting to feel a certain way about the overarching ideas of this. And I'm not stating that as some sort of like Nostradamus kind of thing. I wanted to bring that up because I understand now to what one of the things my rune teacher was telling me was about the connection that this rune has to the sacred twinship, whether we're talking about the Lord and the Lady, or whether we're talking about the sacred twins, like the algaes, if you will. I know algaes as a rune itself has its connections to the sacred twinship, but this rune as well, in relation to, say, like Hengist and Horsa, or to Romulus and Remus. There is the overarching Aryan premonition of the sacred twins. And so whether that is, it just seems all very, very fascinating to me, is what I'm getting at on that one. I think I find it now, as opposed to in retrospect now, there's a lot that seems to be on that. But there's also some other points I wanted to make, is that in relation to works of fury and mental ecstaticism, this rune in particular is a powerful rune. I was always taught about bind runes over the amount of 3, as that is the dynamic number. And this rune in relation to Wunyo and to Thurzaz makes an interesting point, when some people are referring to like the rune magic that maybe will increase your fervor, increase your ecstaticism, increase your trance-like state of both mental and physical pitch, if you will. Take that for whatever the people that are, whoever's listening tonight, take that for what you will, and how it may be something worth pondering about. But this rune kind of also encapsulates the idea of the Filkia, the follower, the part of the soul, as Alzhirigo said, the chthonic part of the soul, the primitive part of the soul that represents your base nature and your mastery over it. So I find that, and that's, I think, would be falling somewhere in between. We're obviously not talking about runic divination, but more about maybe internalized rune work as opposed to Tyne magic and carving runes and trying to manifest your will, or again, reading runes. This is somewhere kind of more of an internal thing, and I think this rune has a lot of value in that.
Absolutely, and it looks like we've got pretty good discussion going on in the chat room so far. I forgot to mention that Zach Phelps threw a donation at us, and I appreciate that very much. Did the little two beers clanking, and $5 donation. Hail Matt and Svan. Hail the AFA. Well, hail to you, Zach, and hail the givers. We appreciate it very much. Yeah, feel free to go and look in the description and use those little fancy bells and whistles, because some folks put a lot of time and effort in getting those. That said, let's get to our first question of the week. So, and this one came in first this time. How are the Knights of the Hosts going? Going pretty good. Going pretty good, I gotta say. Little snag there at the beginning, nothing too bad, and looks like we've got a good momentum behind us. Also, I love doing these every week, so it's exciting to get on here. I look forward to it. Also, my car was in the shop, and it's not now, so I don't feel like I'm 14 again. Now I feel like a grown adult who can transport myself places. So I'm doing pretty good. How's Svan doing tonight?
Speaking of what you just said, kind of in the same boat. We're fixing a lot of vehicles, and we're prepping the house for an elder. Our 102-year-old great grandmother to my children, she is going to be living with us soon. So we're doing a lot of renovations, and I mean, even down to cutting branches off of trees to make space for a new outdoor garage building, so that we could fit extra things in there. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, along with trying to make sure that we fix cars for travel, as we're going to be traveling down to Tennessee. So there's a lot of components moving, and getting ready for Winter Nights at Thorshoff at the same time. So lots of moving parts. And lots of birthdays. It's just absolute high speed here. I will say that much.
And then the second part of the question, maybe you speak this, Svan, because I do not. Also, very important question. What is your favorite soy jack? Mine is Cobson. I am completely out of the loop. I don't speak that, so I have no idea how to answer the question. Svan, are you hip to that lingo?
I didn't know they had names. I'm familiar with the many variations of soy jack. Actually, in many variations that seem to be making themselves into reality, but I didn't know they had names. That's a good one.
All right.
I honestly don't. I don't know. I'm gonna look that up.
Next question is: Will we be doing the Armanen rune set next? No, I don't have any plan on it. That's certainly something we can put down in the list of suggestions as something to hit later, though.
Yeah, and we've kind of been doing coinciding of the Armanen with the Elder Truth, are covering it along with the others.
Question: Does Ehwaz have an extended meaning of marriage? I read that somewhere. I kinda, or it can, but there's better options for that. I mean, we mentioned its meanings towards partnership, and I think in that sense it does. I think that you could extend it to that, but Gabo is certainly a more, I don't know, is a better choice, and is a choice that is certainly more commonly used for that purpose, one that's much more on the face of it applicable to that situation. But I see elements in Ehwaz that correlate to that, depending on how you want to look at it. And as I mentioned early on in this series, the runes are lenses to see and understand the world through. And there's many truths to each of the runes, and context provides everything. I don't think this is an illegitimate lens to view a marriage relationship in, especially if it was put towards, direct purpose. If there was like, cool, we're going to engage in this project together as husband and wife. So yeah, there are obviously wrong answers, but there's a lot of gray area. Yes, it could be used that way answers, where there are some that are very obviously intended for a purpose. You can extend a lot of these for other scenarios and situations, and they do provide a valuable, perspective from looking at them through that lens. Svan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree with your premising of it in a very, it's not quite the same. I would say, yeah, Gabo and Mannaz have far more of a linked meaning. In my school of work, Gabo and Mannaz are congruent together, so they're seen as Leostaver, they're light stabs, whereas Gabo and Ehwaz are kind of in opposition to each other, or Merc. And so this rune, I think, has a lot more to do with perhaps leadership and following. The idea of, again, even they talk about it in the Marine Corps, knowing when to lead and knowing when to follow. And I think it has more of a poignant set of work ethic or goal achievement that isn't necessarily based on a partnership, because I think partnership has a lot more of a bigger context than simply attaining a singular goal. There's multiple goals going on at the same time, and it oftentimes involves a lot of give and take. This is more about, I think, a sense of vision from the rider and accomplishment from the horse, or the team, or the foundry of work going forth. So I absolutely agree. I don't know if this is, and this is, I think, where that confusion comes in I spoke of, because of how closely they are. There is that confusion, but Mannaz, I think, better encapsulates the marriage unification as one of the important things that holds the community together. And we'll get into that next round. But yeah, this is a little bit more focused and more of a top to bottom kind of leadership to driving force, productive force that's being led.
All right. Oh, something I spaced when I was going through my rundown at the beginning of the show. Also, do remember that these come out every Friday as podcasts on Spotify. So please, if you are listening to this, then we appreciate you being part of our audience. If you have questions that you want us to answer and you're listening to these through some other way than live, you can always email questions to nrice@runestone.org, and Nick can get those set up and in the queue for next time.
Robert E. Boyley he got me into the soy jack lore. This is good.
Svan's
Sorry, I'm looking at the chats. I'm a little bit behind. Sorry, guys.
No worries. So I think that is all of our questions. Oh no, we've got one more. The next question is thoughts on Julius Evola. That is a that is a big question. There are many thoughts. I don't know if there's a specific idea of his you want us to discuss, or just in general. As a general thing, I enjoy him quite a bit. I enjoy his works. I have read everything that I can get my hands on that's been translated into English by Julius Evola. I find tremendous value in lots of it. I don't 100% agree with all of it, and certainly with some of the, I don't know, I think extremes that some things are taken to. But I like it in general, and I would say that as far as people who would fancy themselves philosophers, he's probably my favorite and the one I've enjoyed reading the most. Mystery of the Grail is my favorite book by Evola. I like Revolt Against the Modern World, which I think, most people, it's probably the most common one. But I think it's, one of his best works, and the best one-shot look at his philosophy and his worldview. But one book that gets kind of maligned that I think is very good by him is The Yoga of Power. I just think it's unfortunately named, because I think people go into it with an expectation of a different book than they get. I think one of the things about Evola that sometimes can do him a disservice is the translation process. Or at least that's what I like to think. If something sounds odd or a little bit off, I like to pretend that it is the translation situation. I know just some of his works went through a number of things. Some of them, were Italian translated into French and then translated into English. So I think there's some of that to be accounted for. One thing I will say, I forget where it came from, but going around a number of years back, there was a really useful chart of the order in which one should read Evola's books to really get into it and build the foundation and find it accessible. That helped me a lot. I made a mistake early on, and I tried to dive right into the deep end, and it was over my head. I lacked context, and as Evola would say, I lacked a positive reference point to understand how he was presenting things. So I didn't get a lot out of it. The first one I tried to read was Ride the Tiger, and I just jumped in way too deep to start with, and I couldn't get anything out of it. It was dull, and I put it down. And then years later, when I read it again, when I had those points of reference, it was amazing. So there's a smart way to do it, and I'm a big fan. Svan, what are your thoughts on the Baron?
Absolutely, my favorite is Metaphysics of War. I've always kind of been fascinated with the concepts of a forced military conscription versus a voluntary, and then to take it one step further to the idea of the holy warrior, or the divine inclined, as perhaps to be given a mission or to accept a mission, however you either way wish to see that, has always truly fascinating. I guess the layers in which the commitment to achievement of victory is truly fascinating to me. I kind of been in it, and I was, obviously part of the voluntary sense. Was definitely not of the early on in my war fighting career. I wouldn't say career because it wasn't entirely my life, but or my time. It really intrigued me to look into those things and understanding what battle and war is, what the purpose behind it. When you don't have a good purpose, or if you have a misaligned purpose, it gnaws at you. And so I wanted to find the source of that kind of gnawing at me, the questions of why and where I was and what I was doing. And in that pursuit, I found the answers in the correctness of action that a warrior should take, whether it's the holy or divine war, or whether it's the holy and divine mantle of the warrior and his willingness to fight. All of that I found deeply moving, and it really kind of emphasized, I think, that the knighthood of Europe is not something that I think is intrinsic to Christendom. I don't think that the knightliness of Christian crusaders or something was like some sort of culmination of Christianity. It was merely just a kind of a blip in the arc of the overall sense of the aristocratic warrior knight. And I think that there's evidence of that amongst the early Britannians and amongst the Norse, whether we're talking about the Jomsvikingur or perhaps maybe early Varangian Guard and things like that. There's a lot of that showing before the Crusades and Christendom itself. So I've always wanted to elevate a certain sense of the warrior ethos within Asatru to a level of knightliness, or aristocraticism, and the idea that I would suppose the responsibilities that are laid upon your shoulders, and clarifying that. So that's why that book really sticks out to me a lot. I really, really like that one.
So I want to reemphasize that for you guys. If you've never read Evola and you want to know what it's all about, and you're looking for an accessible entry point that are pretty straightforward and that are really good books, Metaphysics of War and The Mystery of the Grail are very easy to digest, but I think really good and really important. And I think that's a really good starting place. So I think those two are both would serve you guys well as a place to start if you haven't dove in yet. Or if in your diving into Evola, you happen to miss those two, I think they're less known than certainly Revolt Against the Modern World or Ride the Tiger or Men Amongst the Ruins. I think those are probably his big three. So these ones may have slipped your slipped your view at first, and I think they're very good ones, both of them. Yeah, I learned a lot of cool little tidbits in Metaphysics of War that I hadn't heard of before, or hadn't made note of before. So I think that was really useful. Our next question is... All right, next question is, I heard Halloween comes from Ireland. Is there some Norse, Scandinavian, Germanic celebration in October? Yes. It's the same deal as so many of these things are. It's the same basic principle. And we call that Winter Nights. That's what we are celebrating at Sigerheim that I advertise for here. About a week and a half from today, we will be out there celebrating. It's the same deal. It is, all of our ancestors understood that in the fall of the year, we are in a special time where the veil between the worlds is very, very thin. And our opportunity to meaningfully interact with our deceased ancestors is special at that time. There is an ease of passing messages between the two worlds in a special way in that time of the year. And I think it carries on, throughout the winter in a way. But this is a special time to reach out to our dead ancestors. I've seen over in the chat folks talking about alpha bloat and disa bloat. Those are our bloats respectively to our male ancestors and our female ancestors. There's a point about Feast of the Einherjar. I think that, again, that's capitalizing on the fall of the year to send energy, send messages, interact with fallen warriors. Feast of the Einherjar is a modern celebration that's built around Veterans Day, but it's something very special, and I'm excited to celebrate that. And again, it's taking this time of the year to do that. So it's fortuitous that it lands on the 11th of November. But yeah, the end of this month is a special time. You are better able to interact with your ancestors. If you can make it to any of the AFA's many Winter Night celebrations that are going on around the country and around the world, please do. You absolutely should. It's a great time to reach out to your family that's passed. But even if you can't, spend that time at your altar at home. Spend that time, if you've got nothing else, with a picture of your ancestor and a candle, and just reaching out. This is a special time. It's a really good time to remember them and to send your love their way. And don't just go through the motions when you do it. Reach out with an open heart and be ready. And I think some really special things can happen, because I think that, our ancestors don't just forget about us when they pass. All of the collected knowledge of our folk tell us that's not the case. Just as you care about them, they care about you, and this is a time to interact. And in the way that we perceive the world, it is most effective, in my experience, if you're the one initiating that reaching out. It's much more easy, and it puts you in a better place to receive if they want to reach out to you as well. You have something to add on that, Svan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I've heard some people inquisitively poking around, some people actually doing the whole well actually thing. It's kind of been in between all of that, but I think it's worth noting, and I would love to do a podcast just on all of our 12 sacred holy tides. I think for the most part there's a lot of confusion, because winter nights is kind of a window, and we have sources of Diser bloat being practiced around this time, and Alfar bloat was practiced in Iceland around what would be February, January timeframe. And what we have kind of done is incorporated the Disir and the Alvar together in this time because of the sacredness of our ancestors. And I think that, being coupled right next to Feast of the Einherjar, which is absolutely a modern, take of the time frame around Veterans Day, it's worth noting that our holidays have evolved, and to incorporate them both and build them up, especially when people will think perhaps maybe in February, Alvar bloat is dedicated to the Alvar, but there are various Alvar, including our dead mortal ancestors that have been ascended and allowed to broach over either the bloodline or the land. And then the will actually crowd. I remember this was a conversation too that I thought was very kind of funny, and it made me think of something. There's a lot of people that winter nights, or I've even heard some people say Samhain or Samhain is how it's generally kind of spoken of. I always that's Gaulish in its origin, but I've heard people say, well, remember, winter nights is the old New Year of our ancestors. And you're absolutely correct, because our ancestors, denoted time based on, this was the sunset of the year. The new day started at sunset because everybody was awake. Everybody was, able to witness it happen. So it would only make sense that culturally the new year would begin at the same time. But what I think a lot of people fail to realize now is our knowledge of understanding of time and has advanced. And now we think of midnight as the turning of the tide. And in a way, Yule has kind of also shifted with that. And Yule has become the new marking of the year as a turnover. So you might get people that are like, oh, well, Yule isn't really actually the new year, and Yule is not the right time to do it, and that it's based on the full moon of the Anglo-Saxon calendar that's going to be in January. And there's just a lot of rigmarole that I think a lot of people pull out, I guess trying to one up or create some sort of established authority, when it's worth noting that as long as you understand, yes, our ancestors definitely had that as the new year, but they also saw the new day at sunset, and now things have kind of changed culturally, and they do. And if we fail to admit that our traditions change, morph, and also kind of fit, early Asatru back in the 90s when I was just coming into the faith, there was really only 8 holidays. Now there are 12. There were no temples then either. And now there are. So a lot of things are moving forward, and they're starting to fill out and form out. I did want to bring that up, is that the significance of the holiday is very important, but there might be some people out there stating these things for whatever their reasons are. And I think it's good to know this is a great time for us to honor our loved ones, the roots of our being. Whether it's the men folk that protect the land, or the women folk who are elevated to protect the bloodlines, or even the land spirits too. Let's not dismiss that as well.
So, in the meantime, Balbo Biggins donated $10. Says, "Fee 5 fum. Here's a tenner. What kind of note can you hit?" It's an interesting question. I'm assuming you want me to make some kind of a musical utterance. I don't know. Do you want me to try to go high or try to go low? Not sure where you're trying to get me to head with it. Give me a little bit more detail, and I can perhaps embarrass myself and make that happen. Also, for another $10 matching from Zach Phelps. Zach, we appreciate you. Shout out to Balbo Biggins. Here's your match. How's the weather in the Shire? Hey guys, they're fun, but we really do appreciate the donations. Thank you.
Interesting call on the Fee Fi Fum, the possible connection of Galder to that story.
That's what I mean about a lens. There's not a direct thing there, but once you start thinking in terms of the runes, you find correlations that happen. And yeah, absolutely, making the Fee Fi Fo Fum sounds is very similar to the work that Edred has you do in the Nine Doors. Where are we on the next one here? Okay. I think we got time for one more question here before we're going to hit our next rune. As always, we will definitely hit all of your questions. I'm trying to do, like a rune per hour, and then we'll go as much as we need to answer your questions. So the next question, would you support having mandatory military service or a draft in case there is a war? Do you think men, and now people are arguing women too, have a duty to serve? Svan, being a veteran, how about you hit this first?
I am not a fan of mandatory draft. I think that there's lessons to be learned from that. I think that the volunteerism is kind of coalescing with national pride. And, you have elements, I think, within our nation that are deteriorating that at a rapid rate. And they're starting to realize that all they got is basically carrots to dangle in front of people. So we're kind of caught in that. It's the monetary carrot versus the draft. and there's no in between for us. And I think that's kind of a product of their own making in a lot of ways. And so I'm not a big fan of mandatory military service unless the nation itself was more cohesive and was more built towards the tenets of protecting the nation and, of course, elevating their the children that are coming in. And I would say children because, we were young, these 18-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old kids with the idea of training them up, giving them discipline, giving them skills, or inherently improving these mandatory members. That I think would have some value, but we don't live in that. That's like holding water in a colander kind of thing. I want the bowl, but we got the colander, so I'm not for mandatory stuff.
So Balbo Biggins threw us an additional donation of $20. It's going well, Chappie, brisk and cool. And Maddie, it was a tenor, so show some tenor chops. I figured that's where you wanted me to go, but I didn't want to assume. I had to look it up because I don't really speak choir, so I had to check it out. Says it's trying to go as high as the male voice can go. I thought that was falsetto, but I don't. Again, not an expert, so we'll see what I can do. I think that's about the best I got for you, but I appreciate your 20. It'll go to a good cause. That said, as a little palate cleanser, context. I appreciate it. Thank you, Svan. Context is everything with so many things. And I'm really torn on that question. I also don't want to come out overly hawkish on it as someone who hasn't served. I could have joined the military and I chose not to and didn't. So I think it would be a little bit hypocritical and preachy for me to talk about the virtues of, why that should be a mandatory case. And I think some of that has to do with country of residence versus nation. And everybody's got a lot of really strong feelings on this, and I don't mean to offend anyone or hurt anybody's feelings. I appreciate every man who has stepped up to serve the country that they're in and who has put their life in the balance. The root of nation is the same as natal, as birth and your people and your folk. And I think when the nation is a clear representation of common values, common heritage, common religion, common folk, in that scenario, I very much support a mandatory service or drafting or whatever you need to be there to stand for your folk. When the country that you live in is not unified in value, in folk, in language, in people, in the things that you value, and the things that you might be fighting for or against, I'm much less enthusiastic about mandatory service. As Svan mentioned, there's a value in voluntary service, and it's kind of a informal poll on people who are willing to put their lives on the line for the agendas and administrations that they find themselves in. And I think that is a useful tool if our leaders would listen to it and and heed that in a certain way. But I think, like I said, context is everything. There are many times through history, if I were in a spot where my ancestors were in, that I would be all for a mandatory service. In the spot that I'm in today, I'm very glad that there's not one. But again, I hope that doesn't offend anybody, and it certainly isn't meant to. I respect any man that's gone out there and put their life in the balance for the man next to them. Yeah.
I think because I saw some of the comments about discipline for young men. It's worth noting too. Of course, we have JROTC. We have military schools with long-standing traditions, whether we're talking about Citadel or VMI, and we have other things too, like the Civil Air Patrol is an interesting one too. There's organizations and groups out there kind of satelliting military and allow your children to gain that discipline, have young men go in and learn how structures are, but yet not quite have the full commitments to, signing on and perhaps, being sent off somewhere with an immediacy towards whatever machinations that DC has at the moment. So I, definitely explore those. I mean, as we find ourselves losing the Boy Scouts, which I guess is no longer the Boy Scouts. I think it's just the Scouts now. We find our young men losing a lot of these things. I would also say, learning a martial art that's regimented, even if it is from the Orient, the idea of learning a structured system of maintaining a uniform and giving respect and dignity to a teacher and to your fellow students. There's a lot to be learned from that as well. But it's kind of, I don't think it's an offense to either way with what you're saying, Alzir. As a military member, sometimes I think a lot of us look back and go, when somebody says I could have joined, but I didn't. And I think there's a great value in the possibility that retrospectively looking at things, perhaps there is a value in not having to experience some of the deep faults of being in that situation, especially if you go in with the wrong ideas. I think a lot of young folk men that I encountered in the Marine Corps were in under premise of, oath and country and patriotism. And there were a lot of non-folk men there that I think were trying to get an education or trying to get money and a paycheck. And so I think the higher ideal, the greater the fall in a lot of ways too.
What I've heard from a lot of guys who have served, and what seems to be a truth in my understanding of things, paying attention to the way things are going, I think there's an idea of the military, or certainly an idea of what the military once was. And I think that some of the things folks in the chat are thinking might be a benefit, like the masculinity being reinforced in young men. I think that's probably much less today than it would have been at any other time in any of our ancestors' military since the dawn of our ancestors. I think there's a lot of time spent in sexual harassment training and gender sensitivity training and things that are not martial in nature. So again, I think context is the key to everything. But we are at the 7 o'clock hour. Let's get into Svan. Could you tell folks about the rune Mannaz?
Mannaz. Yes, this is we were speaking about this just briefly before going live. This is one of my favorite runes. It's worth noting again, there might be some people out there, well actuallys, but in a far worse sense. oh, it's the man rune. It's the rune of man. And they might throw some sort of wrinkled nose up to that. It's worth noting, of course, that all it means people, all the people, the folk as an entirety, and their union together. The two specific, the symbol itself, of course, being that the two genders unified together, the masculine and the feminine, conjoining together in the center and creating stability. This rune is super important in that. It's the man rune, the rune of folk, the rune of folk kind of our community, because man and woman are also more or less focused or placed into frame when we talk about the inner guard versus the outer guard. And so this rune, once you look at it that way, is the balance between masculine and feminine, man and woman, within the framework of a stable community, a stable society, a stable tribe, to use kind of, I guess, more hip or modern used words. The rune Mannaz is symbolically often referred to as it's a man and a woman holding their each other at the hips. Sometimes it could be seen as in a brotherly sense, especially when we talk about the Icelandic rune poem. It's the community members with their arms held at, wrapped, entwined, standing together. This is the rune of Frith. This is the rune of amicable peace and union through oaths. So it doesn't always have to apply simply to a man or a woman, but it has a lot of those meanings. The ultimate point of it is that you're not an island. And I think this rune really exemplifies that. So when we're talking about this rune specifically coming up in divination, you'll often see it correlating directly to either a spouse or a mentor or a person of equal or high renown to you. And it is always about that relationship. Whether it's, read positively or light staff or Merc staff. In Merc staff, of course, there's a breakdown of communication, a breakdown of the friendship, or a breakdown of the lateral between the two. And it can hearken to the idea that you need to improve, or that you need to, make sure that you pass through the threshold, whatever it is, and reattain that equilibrium. It is also a rune, again, of when you're using it in rune magic or in staves or tines, carving them. It's a rune that definitely brings about a settling of discord amongst folk. It is a rune that definitely is brought about when there is a need for resolve, when there is a need for law and not conflict or physical venom to be tossed around. It is one of those runes that can definitely bring things to a surface level where ideas and thoughts can be hashed out without a lot of turbulence or friction. So that's why I equate it often to Frith. Frith is, the maintenance of peace, just as much as a product of discord. When discord is broken amongst folk, there is a perhaps a dharmic need for vengeance, but Frith is not vengeance. It is the maintenance of union and, coexistence and movement together. And this rune exemplifies that as the kin fence. Every vertical is a representation of each of us with our arms interlocked. And if we fall out of that kin fence, it leaves a gap open for our folk or the folk behind us that we're trying to protect. So this rune really does speak about inner guard, outer guard, and the unification between masculine, feminine, and between just folk as a community?
You know what? Let's go ahead and put up the rune poems first, and then I've got some things I'd like to add on it. And I've got them pulled up on my phone, so my old man eyes, I'll be able to read these better than I did last time. Nick, if you can. Oh, go ahead, Svan.
The Futhark, it's worth noting that this is one because it is in the younger, is not in this symbol. In actuality,
So when you're breaking up.
Am I still breaking up? Can you hear me?
No, good now.
Okay. The Algi's rune, or the Elhas rune, the 3 up. This rune, the meaning was placed, and that rune was brought over during the transference of the younger Futhark. So I think it's worth noting in that relationship. So I don't know if I seem to have frozen up a little bit on this side here. I don't know if you guys caught that.
So your camera's froze, but your words are not the
Yeah, that's interesting.
Which
I'm
poem
still
does
hearing
Nick have up? I can't. Okay, I see it. All right, cool. He's got the Icelandic up. Man is the joy of man and augmentation of the soil and adorner of ships. Nick, can you put the Norwegian up next? All right. Man is an augmentation of the soil. Great is the claw of the hawk.
Making reference to that symbol again.
And then finally, could you put the Anglo-Saxon up for us, please? All right. The joyous man is dear to his kinsman, yet every man is doomed to fail his fellow, since the Lord by his decree will commit the vile carrion to the earth. One of the things in all three that, well, okay, I guess one of the things in the Icelandic and the Anglo-Saxon speaks about joy. One of the biggest standouts to me about this rune is that man is the joy of man. I've mentioned before, one of the big, one of the things that I most use the runes for is Galder. And I always like to Galder runes before ritual because it figuratively and literally harmonizes us. Despite my tenor display a few minutes ago, it's cool when you harmonize. Something really special happens, and I think it aligns us in a really special way. But this is one of those runes that I like to use. There is something inherently special about celebration with someone else. And that's with another person, not just two dudes. Everything is enhanced when in the context of community, especially community of the folk. It's one of the things you can practice Asatru as a solitary practitioner, but you miss so much of the meat of it doing that outside of a community. Like so much of our ritual, there's a synergy when multiple people are standing together before the gods, united in purpose, united in faith, united by blood, united by things. you become worth more than the sum of your parts. And you take joy and strength from one another. People are social creatures. We are not meant to be solitary. Matter of fact, outlawry or breaking you off from community and dooming you to be by yourself was one of the worst things imaginable to our ancestors, because your entire context for existence is your relationship with other people, specifically with your people. And separating you and alienating you from that was the worst punishment that they could think of. It wasn't to die. It was to be cut off from, it was to live being cut off from your folk. Focusing on that joy is a fundamental in the AFA when we are together as well. The idea that when we come together, we can transcend the frustrations of life and of, all of the stuff going on in the world we may not like, because for a moment we are with our folk, we're with our people, and we can take joy from one another. It's been pointed out several times over in the chat, I believe, that, ideographically, this is two Wunyo runes facing each other. And I think that's valid. It's also dagas with legs. I think that's also valid.
Right. I've noticed people keying in on those, the two Wunyo runes or the Laguz rune and Isa rune. Now they're starting to see some combinations in there.
So that joy, that celebration, that strength to carry on when two people come together is extremely, extremely important. And I don't think that can be overstated. And I think, I don't think it has to be any more complex than that, but it is profound in and of itself. And the idea of our human connection bringing both people involved joy, and then spreading that out to our family, our tribe, our clan, our nation, our folk. And so as a side note to that, I would say the biggest thing that we engage in as Gothar is counseling. Biggest, by biggest, I think, I mean, probably most frequent thing we engage in is counseling. One of the, and people have toxic tendencies often. One of the biggest ones that we have is a tendency to isolate when going through hard times. When someone is suffering or they go through a hardship in their life, they have a tendency to hole up in their house and lock the world out, lock other people out, and wallow in their sorrow. And, there's plenty of occasions where stepping back and centering yourself is a reasonable thing to do. But man, when you're having a hard time, when anyone is going through a hard time, the worst thing they can do is try to sit by themselves and be haunted by their demons, haunted by their regrets, and wallow in their misery. The best advice that I always give every single person, myself included, when you are feeling low for whatever reason, go do stuff with other people. Even if it's just being around them and hanging out. But come together with other people is such a source of strength and joy that I think we lose sight of in the modern world that we have around us, because with so much electronic things, we can simulate that. we can have noise, we can hear other voices, have a TV on in the background. It's not, you don't feel as alone as if it's all quiet. But the real interaction with another human being makes all of the difference. And I just don't think that can be said enough.
A very wise member of our community suffered a great loss, and I was absolutely moved by his need and his desire and his wisdom of coming to Thorshof for an event. And he spoke of this loss, and I had never prayed so hard during a bloat to give him strength, to give him light, to give him a focus towards the dawn and a focus towards overcoming that adversity of loss. And it floored me that he did the opposite that I think we often always encounter with people kind of closing up. And I understand why some people do it, but he did the opposite. And that absolutely struck me to the core of the importance of what community is, of what our folk are, what our church is. And it inspired me to really kind of follow suit in that bravery.
We got a 2 cups of coffee from Cole Van Gilder. I have never felt such love and support as I have when I came to the AFA. I'm only sorry I can't afford more. Thank you, Githia Callahan and Gothi Stam, for taking time and helping me through such a difficult time in my life. I am really, really glad that you reached out and that they were able to help you. That's absolutely what our Gothar are here for, every single one of us. And I'm very happy that when you were struggling with something, you were able to reach out and that our Gothar were able to be there for you. So we have got some few questions lined up here where we left off from Barry. As I missed the Ohio Winter Nights and can't make it to Sigerheim, is there a certain way I should celebrate it at home with family beyond just a personal blow with my deceased? Svan, how would you advise Barry and his family celebrate Winter Nights if they're just able to do it as a family this year?
Yeah, I think right out of the gate, setting your harrow up and placing out your ancestral steads, not so much the god steads or statues or symbols of the gods that you invite the gods to be in your home and invite them to sit and bear witness. In this case, pulling out if you have pictures, in my family in particular, we use wedding photos because it has, again, that polarity of the masculine, feminine as they're joined together. So our photos generally are from weddings throughout the ages. Some of them are very old photos, sometimes singular photos, things of that nature, bringing down photographs of strong patriarchal and matriarchal members of your family and giving them homage and space on the harrow at this time, I think is the first move towards that. And cleaning your harrow and setting it up in relation to that. And then when you are ready, I would say combine it with a meal. So holding bloat and giving gift in a bowl to your ancestors, to the Disir and to the Alvar, the protectors of your home and your land, the protectors of your bloodline, and of your children and your future, and giving bloat to them and then holding a meal, saying a prayer over the food in thanks to them and all the sacrifices that they made in order for you to sit with your family and eat and enjoy this time. Perhaps, telling stories of them if you know stories from your past, your ancestors. And I would also say, too, it'd be a great time to perhaps prepare your outdoor harrow or a horg, the stones or the altar outside as well, and leaving gifts to the land spirits as well. I think that those three points of concentration towards your devotion are at the height of this moment and this holiday. And that may play out different for everyone. You may have a strong patriarchal figure in your family that you have a lot of stories about, or a matriarch that you do, and you could focus on that. But also just as the Disir and the Alvar at large, the Dark Alvar are the mortals that have been elevated and ascended to a position to protect the lines, and giving thanks to them in those respects. However you do it, there are little local things that people do. So if you have just your family, I mean, I would say at the bare minimum, just do that. There are some people that kind of combine that with perhaps folk rituals that they may do with close kinsmen. But that's hard to tell, and that's more nuanced for every person in their local area. But holding bloat and having your harrow near and in the same place, or processing to the table after bloat with your family, and then holding another remembrance over the meal and giving thanks, I think is a really good start to practicing this holy tide, if you're unable to make it out to your kinfolk.
Absolutely. I don't have a whole lot to add. Talk about your ancestors. Tell your kids about your ancestors. Tell stories. If you have artifacts, when I say artifacts, if you have stuff that used to be your grandparents and they're not with us anymore, if you have those things, there's something that your kids can reach out and touch and connect them with somebody who's gone before them. Pictures, we are so blessed to live in a time where we can see what so many of our ancestors look like. We can visually see what they looked like when they were alive. And that's something that, about 6 generations or so ago, they couldn't do that. So that's a really special thing that we have access to today. Speak their names, tell their stories. It doesn't have to be some overly elaborate, sing-songy, prose, Viking ballad to them. You can just talk about grandma, but talking about your family, talking about your ancestors, sharing those with younger members of your family that didn't meet those people or haven't heard those stories. That's a really special thing. And it's special, but it's pretty easy to access. And it's really important. And I think so many of us don't do that. Another thing, and I think this is a reminder, and I'm talking to myself as much as anybody else here. One thing that is shameful that we all do, myself included, if you are not, we have family that over time perhaps we are not close to for whatever reason. But it's really unfortunate, but very common amongst our folk, to completely ignore grandparents that we have no relation to, or we have no relationship that we've built with them in life. Yet once they pass, we'll go worship our ancestors and honor them at an altar and do all this and that. But while they're here with you in this day and age, do you reach out and give them a call? Do you call and say hi and check in and ask how they're doing? It's awkward if you're not close, or it can be, or if you have some other family issues I don't know about. But it's lame and you're not living up to your responsibilities if you don't show love and interaction with those people in life, but then get all, all righteous and excited about it after death. You have that opportunity now to interact with those people. We talk about how at winter nights, it's so much easier to interact with our ancestors. You know what? Our ancestors that are still with us, it's real easy right now to pick up your phone and give them a call. And I think that is equally, if not more important, to stress to everybody. I say that like, my grandmother, I am fortunate enough to have a grandmother that is still with us. She's 93 this year. But we've never been super close. We didn't spend a lot of time together when I was growing up. I have a lot of cousins that she has spent more time with and for whatever reason was a little bit closer to, and it just wasn't a thing. But I really should do a better job of reaching out and talking to her. And it was really special earlier this year when she came down with my father to visit me and my family. And it was neat to have 4 generations there, at one time, my grandmother, my father, myself, and my daughter. So do that. That's important too. I'm sorry, I kind of went on a rant there.
No.
What? Yeah, call your grandparents.
Yeah.
Old people, call your parents. These are important things.
I saw over in the chat, there was a question about what should I give? Some things to think about. Again, this is different for everyone. Sometimes do you know certain things? Whether, I know, for instance, that my grandparents were very fond of, they smoked, and they were, the product of their generation, and they enjoyed coffee. And so giving a gift of coffee, I think also it's worth noting culturally the usage of the color red in semblance to mortality. And it's up to you whether you can do things. Oftentimes I find people, when they give gifts to the ancestors, they often place them within a hole or in the ground after a certain period of time. During the bloat, they may take a sacred like mead or any of the gifts and place them in a hole, pour them out, place sacred gifts, and then cover them with soil. You can also burn them as well if you have the ability to, whether it's through a fireplace or a place outside that is kind of a sacred place, not some place where you just like burn mundane things or mundane refuse if you're doing like a leaf pile or what have you. But the way in which you give generally can reflect in relation to the middle worlds with the earth, or the ascendancy of the gods through fire or upon high. And some people I haven't spoken to talk about how they believe that the Alfar and the Disar are elevated or ascendant souls of their family line. So again, fire could be applicable there. But yes, giving those gifts, oftentimes, wrapped in red and placed within the earth, I think is a decent way to start. If you're talking about components of ceremony, if you're talking about components of the bloat, you're giving libation there at your harrow, then you eat a meal. Some people even place a plate and cups and things in a spot at the table in remembrance for those who could not sit there and dine. And then they place certain items or gifts or things, letters, and they place them within a sacred spot, and they bury them in the ground, and perhaps use that spot, annually. But that's just some ideas in gift giving there.
Yeah, again, context is everything. And I've used this line of thinking when talking about gifting the gods often. It should be much more accessible to wrap our heads around, though, when we talk about gifting to our ancestors. Now, most of us, or I don't know in today's world, a great many of us knew our grandparents. What would they like? Don't ask me and Svan. I don't know your grandpa, but you do, or your mom does, or your dad does. What would they have liked? That's what matters. I don't, Svan and I, as Gothar, can help facilitate the bridge between the gods and the folk, asking us what the gods might like because of our professional status with this and our long time doing it. I think we can shed some light perhaps on what our gods would like most. But your ancestors, that's one of the most special things about this. They're your ancestors. You are connected to them directly through blood, through, one or two generations. Your family knows these people to the best of their ability. What would they like? And you know that answer more than we could ever hope to know. And if you don't, because there wasn't that closeness there, perhaps you were adopted, any number of things, then some suggestions, and I saw this in the chat, are, what do you think they might have liked? What do you like that you wish you could share with them? These are all ideas, especially kids. And I say that honestly, just thinking in my head, if I wanted to make an offering to my grandfather, what I might do. I might go buy him a Whopper. Me and my grandpa, when I was a kid, I used to love to just go for rides. I inherited the car. It became my first car, was this Eddie Bauer edition Ford Bronco 2. And we would drive around and look at stuff. And we lived in Anchorage, Alaska at the time. And we would go pick up some Whoppers at Burger King because he loved a Whopper. So as far as a fast food burger goes, it's hard to beat the Whopper. It's flame broiled. It's delicious. But so we would go up to a place called Arctic Valley. And it was, this high spot in the Chugach Mountains where you had this amazing view of Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson. It was Fort Richardson and Elmendorf Air Force Base at the time, and Anchorage. And it was just this really cool view. It's an awesome spot to go to. And there was some pullouts there, and we'd sit there and we'd look out over the city and talk about stuff and eat our Whoppers. So as simple as that, stuff with kids. What do you like that you want to share with grandma and grandpa? It can be a very simple thing, but it can be very meaningful. So I think this is a really special opportunity that's very, very accessible to all of us. And I think if you could only do one Asatru related ritual a year, just one to start with, this would be the best one to start with and the most easily accessible one to start with. So I would really encourage that. Looking over on the side, trying to keep up with the chats. We've got a really good chat room tonight, a really nice chat room. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for, thank you guys for participating, and we appreciate all the really good questions. Our next one up. Would you agree that our natural habitat as Hyperboreans is in the north, and that more of our people should try to migrate to more northern climates if we have the option? And do you think it is possible our Aryan genetics can warp over time if we're in the southern hemisphere for too long? No, I would not agree with that. Okay, pause. Yes, I would agree that I think are natural habitat. Good night, Aubrey. I love you too. You sleep good. Yeah, I think that we are from Hyperborea. Absolutely. I think that's our natural habitat. And I think historically, northern climates, certainly the northern hemisphere, are obviously historic homelands. But no, one of the amazing and special characteristics of our folk is our ability to explore and to conquer new lands and to spread our folk as far as we can find. I think it's our destiny to take that to other planets and other solar systems one day. That's certainly in keeping with what our founder has always wished for our folk. Our people have always ridden out into the unknown, ridden out into the sunset to conquer, to explore, to colonize, to tame new lands. And I wouldn't ever want us to stop doing that or to look down on doing that. I think there's something cool and for any of our audience watching this, there's something cool about our kinfolk that are still in Europe. We idealize that a lot. We see their sacred spaces, and I think we have a romanticism about that. But in a lot of ways, our best, our brightest, our boldest were those that went out to conquer, that went out to colonize new lands, that set out on adventure and built North America and lots of South America, that built new lands, that built Australia, that made these things happen. And I celebrate that. I certainly don't see any reason that our ancestry, our blood, our kin, or our gods are less accessible if we happen to be in the Southern Hemisphere. And so in that, in the first part that we are from Hyperborea, I would agree, but that we should, go back to, we should somehow be compelled to go back there instead of spreading our wings and taking flight. I don't agree with that. Svan, what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, I definitely would think that, I've noticed it even with my family, having some neighbors or people on the street that are, from southern climes, but yet I find myself getting out more during the colder, time of the year, and almost in a natural inclination to do so, or, finding it with when there's a good time to go out when it's overcast to work around the house and in the yard and things like that. And I always kind of joke and say it's in the most advantageous sense of my being to come out during these times and work when other people are hunkering down in this kind of cold weather. But I mean, I'm also very acclimated to and have been throughout the world in very, very hot places, whether it's Southeast Asia or the Middle East and so on and so forth. And then I think ultimately, yeah, it is our spirit. I think that we can harken back. I often lead every bloat that I do with turning towards the north as a hearkening to understanding origins and where we come from and where we will go in our death. But the ultimate, I guess, like if it was to physically say we should migrate, that is, I think, too much of a call. I think it's better served that our people are carrying the northern spirit with them wherever they go. Is a better way to look at it, perhaps.
I'll mention something else. This is kind of a note on directionality in AFA ritual practice. The default setting in bloat since the dawn of modern Asatru has been to face north. It's one of those things, I find myself, I was in, I mentioned a number of weeks ago, I did a service for some incarcerated folk at High Desert Prison in Susanville, California. And you're in there and it's disorienting, and you're in this, like, I guess, library multi-purpose room space. And so I was asking the guys, like, hey, which way's north? Because that's where you typically set up the altar and you typically direct generic things to, unless there's a purpose not to. That said, there's instances where that's not the case. Often when we float to Ostara, we face east for the rising sun. She's the dawn goddess. But importantly, and what got me thinking about this was in our funeral rites and in our graveyards, we face west. We face west because west is the future. West is where the sun goes and where we chase it. We follow after that sunset. We push west. We conquer west. As all of the dark spots on the earth are revealed and we know more, it's a little bit less poignant. But that moving towards the west into the future is still very symbolically important to our folk. So we orient all Asatru graves in the AFA to where when you're reading the headstone, you are facing west. You're facing that setting sun. And as a point, in case anybody didn't know, we have facility to accept the interred ashes of our folk in regular grave plots at Odenshof, at Thorshof, at Njordshof, and at Sigerheim. And we're set up and have the plans as soon as we have someone's ashes to honor, to set up a columbarium, again, where we are facing to the west at Baldershof when that time comes. So that's a real thing. That's not a theoretical thing. We have people at these locations. We have folks interred already at Odenshof, Thorshof, Njordshof, and at Sigerheim. What else do we got here? All right. Our next question. Should we use the term Hyperborean to describe ourselves? I don't think it's wrong to use that term. I think that, again, I think the audience matters. I think a lot of people might be confused by that and not really understand it. I don't think it's incorrect. I think our people do flare out from the north due to the ice age and things that way. I think that we come from a northern polar place. I don't say that's 100% hard AFA doctrine. That's just certainly my leaning on it. Again, I saw in the chat when this question first came up, I think Aryan is the best use because it's not tied to a place. It is tied to a set of values, to an ideal. I think that works the best. Obviously, to the uninitiated, it has negative connotations. So honestly, I think white people works a lot, especially here in the United States, and I don't think we should be ashamed of that in any way. But I think Hyperborean is a completely appropriate thing to use if you want to do that. Svan, what do you think about it?
It's an interesting title. Of course, Borealis and Hyperborealis or Hyperborean has to geographical understanding, especially from Rome and from Greece. But I don't know. I feel that a lot of people that would miss the mark. Perhaps it could be in certain groups or understanding, and it would be simply understood, but other groups of people might not understand that in reference. Again, like you had mentioned too, Aryan for a lot of the folk. You know, they absolutely understand it with the idea of honor and the idea of nobility, and what that might mean in attaining that mantle or having that responsibility on one's shoulders, and you know, connotations to aristos and aristocratic ideals. But I also like to use white, but I also like to use folk. I think that's the name for us as a people. When you speak of like the Inuits and how that means they are the real people. I think a lot of folks or a lot of different peoples all over the world utilize this understanding, and the word folk itself is very much a relatable way of understanding who we're talking about. So I oftentimes use that, and I think of it. I remember having a conversation where someone was saying, you know, like folk and non-folk as some sort of perhaps an insult, but I likened it to the idea that if I was in a room with two people from China, I would be the non-Chinese guy. That would be very clear to them. It could be spoken in some way, shape, or form in their language like that, and it would be completely understood without any sort of laying of some sort of grievance or whatever nomenclature people use to identify themselves as the in-group and somebody as the out-group is obviously not.
The round-eyed Svan.
Right. The Guaylo. And again, that brings up a great point that you brought up about using the word white. A lot of people have a tendency to not like that, but it's worth noting that that is a nomenclature that's easy for us to understand. It is a checked box that we can clearly identify as, and it holds. I mean, I would say the people that maybe not particularly conducive to us as a people are very, very quick to place us in that nomenclature. So it's like if you don't want to identify as white, there are plenty of people in this planet that are willing and absolutely able to identify you as a white person. So whether you like it or not, but it's I think the usage of it is about digging your heels in and not allowing the verbiage that a lot of people are trying to weaponize against us, turning that into some sort of a bad word. And I think that utilizing it and saying, no, yes, I am white. I'm unabashedly so, or I'm proud of being white is completely, I think, something worth stating and keeping in the realm of speech, especially when words are being twisted and convoluted or changed. It's important that we maintain the heading of a lot of things, and that's one of them in particular.
So I saw some clarification in the chat, and I thought it was worth addressing too. Yes, absolutely, our people are adapted over many, many, many generations to thrive in a more normal northern climate. And it is more challenging for our people to be in a tropical climate or in a desert climate. Our people have always embraced challenges and conquered challenges and overcome them. But certainly the point that we are more naturally suited to the place where our genetics have developed over thousands of years, obviously that's science. I don't think the Aryanness of our genes decays in the South. I do think that we become, over many, 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 many generations in tropical climates or desert climates, we become more suited for that environment genetically. But that's from within our folk soul, not from without. That's not, we're not losing Aryanness through intermixture. No, we're evolving our Aryanness in a geographically specific way, and I don't think there's anything wrong or sacrilegious or unacceptable about that. But certainly, I mean, we've as I myself can attest, I was born and raised in Alaska, and I don't do well with the heat. You should see me at anything at any of our Southern Hofs. Like the most simple ritual that I do, I come out and, I look like I just jumped in a pool. I lift up my tie and there's this massive wet spot. It's really kind of ridiculous. Svan's laughing because he knows it's true. So I mean, I feel that within one generation, but yeah, our people have always overcome those challenges, and we'll overcome the new challenges in the future. We have one more question I think we're going to hit before we get to our last rune tonight. And this is actually a throwback to our first rune of the night. I'm late for the Ehwaz section, but what is your idea about that rune and its relationship with death? And I saw this over in the chat, and I thought this was fascinating because people in the chat, mentioned that it is that the horse, in a mythological sense, can take people or gods or heroes between the worlds, can take them to the land of the dead, can take them to all 9 of the worlds if you're talking about Sleipnir with his 8 legs. There is absolutely something to that, and I'm really, really glad somebody brought that up. The horse as a method of transcendence or a method of traveling between the worlds, I think that's extremely relevant. And I think, thank you for bringing it up, because it's not an aspect of this rune that I'd ever thought of before. Not in that way. I mean, I've thought of it in other circumstances, but not as relates to this rune. And I think that's really, really interesting. And I think it's perhaps a rune that is very useful in sending things beyond our world to the different worlds, to the different forms of existence and beyond the veil. But I think that's fascinating, and I'm really, really glad it was brought up. Svan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was kind of hinting towards that when I was mentioning the usage of that rune in relation to Wunyo and to Thursaz and ecstaticism and the ability for the consciousness to be transferred or moved through barriers, through thresholds, and into higher attainment. That really is what I was kind of alluding to, is the rune as a vehicle of non-corporeal movement, the ability to attain that understanding. And that, I think, does clearly play out in mythic language when we were talking about the horse of the sun and the horse of day and horse of night and horse of the moon. But also speaking of Sleipnir, the slipping one, the one that slips between all, and the dynamicism there. And even with the recent kind of initiation towards understanding about like Bloden Hovi of Freyr and of Lord Frey, and the passage of the horse into the underworld. It does have a lot of points, but I would say, yeah, this rune in relation to transferring the non-corporeal consciousness or soul or the mind, or which is all in one, really, yes, absolutely can be used in that way.
All right. With that, Svan, could you tell the folk about Laguz?
Absolutely. So Laguz is also in the younger Futhark and the elder Futhark, and it remains in the same. So it's again a little confusing when we talk about Mannaz or Madur. Laguz or Lor is the rune of water. It could be interpreted too as the leak, because those two words have an origin, especially in relation to the water reed or the sprouting of a reedy kind of garlic or leek, as it's seen as a grass of healing and a grass of life, and especially life. Even though you cut it down, it comes right back out, and its close association with water. But the first and primary, I would say, is that this rune associates with water. It could be a body of water, the lake, if you will, Laguz and the lake, or it could be, some people do account it to the motion of water, whether it's the currents or the rivers or even the ocean in a sense. But it has a deep connection to fluidity. And in that, there's a connection between the mental state of dreams and of consciousness, the ability for our consciousness to become still and to look deepwards and inwards, perhaps even below the water surface, or that our consciousness can flow into the world and break through cracks, break through barriers. But it's a slow and more organic flowing of our intent and our will. Obviously, there's clear connotations to water in relation to the wells, being that there is a wellspring in heaven, there is a wellspring in the middle, and there is a wellspring in the lower, and how all of those are interconnected through the roots. And so this again speaks of cycles and the idea of that which goes ultimately below being drawn up and descended again down from Yggdrasil and into Earth's well, and then down into the middle and through Mimir and back down again. There's this constant state of flowing of the sacred rivers in all of the levels, the level above time, the level within time, and the level below or away from time. So this rune has, it's again, like its name is kind of associated with it. It's hard to pin it down. With good reason, I think, is that this rune is deeply associated with fluid concepts. Some people associate it to dreams, to emotional well-being, others to health. Leechcraft, the leechcraft healing. Oftentimes, I've talked to people about how they associate this rune with the art of healing, in specifics to the Ausenjur air and her healing abilities through tonic or through soup or a potion, if you will. The idea of the garlic and the leek in relation to healing goes all the way back. Even the Goths are mentioned of it in a lot of their usage of words. Even when they rewrote the book of Matthew, there is references to health and medicine in relation to the usage of water, broth, herbs, and of the sacred way of infusing those healthy components through the medium of water. And you can see that again, the sacredness of boiling meat from bloat, perhaps the animal that was given up sacral butchering, whether it was a horse or a bull, oftentimes was boiled in a cauldron. So this rune has deep kind of anchoring in those concepts. But when we talk about it in, say, divination, this rune often symbolizes perhaps secrets bubbling up, or levels of understanding that are not quite fully understood yet and are coming into being. That there is a level of the water coming out of the ground and bubbling up like a wellspring, or the sprig of the leek, breaking out of the ground and spearing up into the sky with virility and life. There's kind of translational debates about one of the sacred rivers in Ausgarth, or in heaven, in relation to whether it is the Spear River or it's the Leek River, the Garlic River, in the sense of all those connotations to healing and health and virility in life. So this rune is hard for a lot of people to just flat out say it. You know, it means community, it means man, it means the folk, it means this. This rune has a lot more to do with the tidal rise and fall of consciousness, emotion, and spiritual levels within the individual or within the folk, or all around the way that we kind of heal ourselves spiritually.
So yeah, and I got stuff I'd like to add, but let's go through the rune poems first. Nick, if you could put those up, starting with the Icelandic, please. Water is eddying stream and broad geyser and land of the fish. Norwegian, please. A waterfall is a river which falls from a mountainside, but ornaments are of gold. And the Anglo-Saxon, please. The ocean seems interminable to men if they venture on the rolling bark, and the waves of the sea terrify them, and the stallion of the deep heed not its bridle. So Laguz has always been liquid to me. I understand its phonetic links to the leak. I get that. But the value of it has very traditionally to me been the flow of liquid and the use of liquid in many forms. Water is liquid is essential and special in most of our rituals for a variety of reasons. Water itself is sacred to our people in a lot of different contexts. One of the interesting landvetier cults of our folk has always been the veneration and celebration of river goddesses. The idea of lakes and bodies of water being sources of magic and perhaps benediction, perhaps, scary spookiness, depending on the context. But, the idea of Excalibur emerging from being handed by the Lady of the Lake out of the waters, the idea of so many sacrifices being made into bogs, into lakes, into waters. The sacredness of there were sacred springs thought to be, again, used for healing. But one of the most, a couple of the most poignant examples of Laguz to me in our ritual practice are the idea of blood, the fluid that animates life itself, that connects the river that connects us to our ancestors. Literally the river flowing from the dawn of our folk down through us to our children. That blood, that liquid, that Laguz that connects us to all that have come before us and back to the gods themselves in that, the blood and the goodly hue that they gave us. But very specifically in the Alu formula, the idea of a liquid being a medium to transmit energy from person to person, from us to the gods, from the gods to us. Liquid has always been that, and that's the commonality through ritual. I've talked before about how a modern AFA bloat is probably very different than a Viking bloat. It's probably very different than a Neolithic bloat. But the point of commonality between all of that is that liquid transmitting blessings from us to the gods, from the gods to us. In its most primal sense, with the blood of the sacrifice, that liquid, literally, when the animal was alive and hands were laid on it and you imbued it with your messages for the beyond, and then in a moment when it was killed, it literally went beyond the veil to carry that message. And the blood that was bled from it was used to spread the blessings of the gods amongst the folk by splattering the walls of a hoff, by anointing a weapon with it. That distributing of blessing through liquid was fundamental. We do that now most often with mead or with, another alcoholic beverage. But the idea of sharing that with the gods, of putting our might into a horn and then pouring that out for them, or filling that horn and then literally consuming those blessings from the gods, or being asperged and splattered like of old with that liquid containing their blessings. We see that in the rite of baby naming. We see that, with the splashing of water to secure a name to a child. It's fundamental, and amongst our folk, the sharing of a drink, the idea of sharing a horn in toasting, in celebration, in communal ritual, passing drink from person to person and then sharing in that liquid. That is the Laguz element, is so essential to any of our communion with our brothers and sisters, with our gods, with our ancestors. One of the most common ways to offer a blessing or a good feelings to your ancestors is to pour out a libation to them, is to to take a drink and to offer them one, to leave out a shot. I don't. It's the phrase that kept coming to mind that had me chuckle is pouring a beer on the curb for your dead homies. But like realistically, the idea of pouring out an offering to those who have passed is a thing, and it always has been to our people. And it is that so many of these, and we mentioned just a few minutes ago about Ehwaz being a rune of transmitting something, of transmitting and traveling and taking something between worlds. Laguz is another rune for that. It is a rune of transmission of something through ancestry, through genetics, through blood, through the mead of ritual, through that, having that liquid medium to transport things from one place to another, to facilitate that or to animate that interaction, is extremely important to all of our ritual interactions. So yeah, that's what I've got on Laguz. Svan, do you
I
have any
think,
thoughts on Laguz?
yeah, I was going to say there's a great internalization of this rune in relation to the attainment of the mead of poetry as well. The drinking of the three cauldrons, in which Gunloth gives passage and ascendancy through the liquid, through the mead horn, through the bearing of the horn, and then the horn is used to, empty out the three cauldrons, of ordrior of consciousness, and bodden of the soul, and son of the body, or the lower self. So it's kind of the idea is that this traveling upwards of and the attainment of every level, and then the outpouring of wisdom and awareness, consciousness, or even supra consciousness into manifestation. This rune can get deeply esoteric if you really internalize it through Galder and meditation as well.
All right. Well, we have some questions lined up here. Sorry, there was a Nick sent me a note about a question, and I made a chuckle. All right. The next one that I see, and forgive me if I've missed any, do you think places near the Arctic Circle, like Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Scandinavia, and Russia, were once Hyperborea and then broke apart into separate lands we know them as? I am not that up on the continental drift idea that relates to that and exactly where they were, but because of the ice sheet at the time, functionally they were during the Ice Age, because solidity under feet united all of those places at that time during the Ice Age. So in one sense, certainly that was all one place during the Ice Age, and as the glaciers receded, the waters that separate those places separated. It's interesting how truly close those places are when you get up over the pole. I've only flown over the pole one time, when I went from, strangely enough, Oakland Airport to Oslo, and then back from Stockholm to Oakland. I guess twice. So we flew a polar route up and over, and it's really interesting how close things are when you get very close to the pole. And I thought that was really, really interesting. But I'm not familiar with whether those continents were connected at that point and separated off in that way. That's just not something I'm really up on. Svan, do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a tough one. When we talk about projected continental shifts of plates and land masses, and how they, it would, in an essence, lend to the idea that things were kind of pushed northward and have been slowly spreading out, if you will. And again, you brought up the great point that I didn't even initially think of, is that even if they weren't physically connected, they could be connected by water turned to ice, and those movements that could be done. And there's a lot of speculation in relation to, like, say, a landmass that may have existed between Denmark and Scotland. And there's so much out there that we are learning that are being revealed quite literally out of the water, the mysteries of the water holding some of these answers. I don't know. It's hard to say, but equally interestingly enough, and perhaps this holds credence, is that, you know, the migrations of us coming out of the north, and there are, of course, references to this. You know, there is also the references of other folk kind of moving northward when we talk about like the Finno-Ugric people, or if we talk about the northern, you know, Eastern or Oriental Asiatic folks that had moved up through there in Eastern Russia, and even down to, you know, as so far as even northern Japan with the Ainu people and some of their adaptations to the cold and stuff. So if it's possible for that migrational movement northward, it's just as much the possible southward. And so that's what I mean by it could lend credence to the idea of it. You know, certainly there are a lot of people that place an under the development of us as a people being separate from other people as they have originated places in the world. And if that was the case, then, you know, us migrating from north into what I guess most people like to refer to now as the Caucasus Mountains, or central Russia, or you know, Western Asia, or whatever is defined now. I mean, perhaps a possibility, but I wouldn't be able to say. I find more wonder and never quite defining, because there's always something new to learn. I also understand that we have to sift through ideas. A lot of people have their own inclinations to painting the development of our people in their own way, oftentimes for wholly even just political reasons. It's worth just keeping an open mind about it. And as we start to understand things genetically and geologically, I'm interested in that, the expanse of that unknown frontier, which is in essence our past. There is a certain point where it just becomes greatly mysterious, and I just want to be kind of open to it all.
All right. Just looking over at the chat. Adam, we're very, very glad that you're here. Our next question: do you think people with mental or physical disabilities / deficiencies should avoid procreating? This is something our ancestors believed, which is understandable, considering the harsh conditions they lived in required excellent genes. But do you think it's something that should be applied to today, or do you think this is barbaric and outdated? So, as with most things, context is everything. You say our ancestors practiced it. I'm certain in the great flow of time, some of our ancestors did that, some didn't. The overriding drive of all mammals is to procreate and to further their line. That's how life on Earth works. That's very powerful, and I don't think it's to be discounted. There's degrees with everything. And there's lots of disabilities and, you know, both physical and mental, that are not genetically related, that are environmental. There's some that are genetically related. And then the more we learn about that, the more our science advances, the more we understand things, the more we look to what the odds are of that happening. And there's no one right answer to this question. It's not that only the elite of our folk should procreate. We're at a time where our race, our people, are declining in number in a lot of places. So I think that there's, you know, even more reason now for our folk to, you know, be fruitful and fecund and have children. But I think this is a really personal thing. I don't necessarily think that we need rules on it as much as families need to make this decision. Men and women need to make the decision of whether they carry genes where the likelihood of something really bad is high enough that this is what, you know, they feel that they need to do. I mean, yeah, it's very nuanced, and I see the logic in a lot of these things. And if there's a significantly high chance that your offspring will suffer greatly because of the situation, then maybe you don't. There is a overriding impulse from your ancestors and from all of biology for you to procreate if you can, and to transfer your genes to the next generation. That's fundamental in, as I said, in mammalian existence. That's just how we do. But we do have will, and we have the ability to cut that link from going forward if it is so awful or so debilitating that that's something that you want to do. But I don't think there's a one size fits all answer, and there's so much gray area. There's, you know, very small things on how you process certain vitamins being a deficiency to major deformities or crippling mental illness. And, you know, the devil's in the details. There's so much in between there that makes all the difference. Svan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you hit it really well. I mean, biologically, we always seek to. I mean, nature works in its way of filtration. You know, the primogen of the body that is a higher, you know, functioning mind and a higher functioning body, and you know, seeking a good, you know, partner, whether you know, a husband or a wife. You want these, you know, features to be you know, well and good in order for the benefits of achieving nature's drive, our drive to continue that natural law. But it is nuanced. I mean, there are things that we, you know, whether we know ahead of time and science is allowing us to see certain things and head certain things off, but we're also becoming aware of problems and are currently fixing them. I immediately come to mind the genetic disease of cystic fibrosis, in which two perfectly healthy, normal people could get together, and for some reason, the way it works out is that their child has a high likelihood of having debilitating lung disease that could very well cut their life extremely short. But with also that being understood and becoming something that people have to encounter and work towards, there are advancements in the care of those things. And so, like, again, bringing up health and the need for medicine. You know, there is I think an over romanticized view of the idea that our ancestors perhaps, you know, if it wasn't of the paragon of time, they were simply cut away or discarded. And I'm certainly, there are times of that. I mean, Procopius even spoke of during the migration periods that some Germanic tribes committed genocide because they had to cut loose some of the older folks that could no longer care for themselves or move with the group. And you know, those things are, again, they're environmentally dictating, they're genetically dictating. And I think that our advancement towards medicine and understanding should work towards healing people that can be healed. But again, it is very nuanced. And again, the function of people within that society, if they're so dilapidated, either mentally or physically, oftentimes they will not be able to find a mate and you know, procreate and have children, simply because it doesn't facilitate with the conditions that they're in. So sometimes nature does just work within that realm of ruling. But we do know that, our ancestors did see use in people within our society, deaf, blind, mute, or injured in some way, that their body was not whole anymore. They still had use. They still had an ability to give. So I think that is often a thing that's either overlooked sometimes internally by people who have this kind of very black and white view of it. And then there's also people outside of our folk who think that, perhaps, the Vikings of yesteryear would dash a child against the rocks if he had a birthmark or something. And I think that's a little, overly dramatized barbarianism kind of thoughts or what have you, these kind of ideas that they come up with. So yeah, it's extremely nuanced, and we have to take into consideration what is capable of happening, what we can stop by having knowledge, whether it's genetic or medicinal knowledge, and what we can heal and help and allow our folks to grow and attain. Again, the overarching paragon of our people is to have healthy, whole children who can grow up and meet other healthy, whole children and have more. So I think ultimately it equalizes itself out, whether we intend to plan it or not in the long run.
So I was waiting on side resources to covertly feed me the have 'em all verses. Svan, do you know where those are off the top of your head? I think they're useful here.
Yes, I do not have them. I know I was making mention of them, but the exact number off the top of my head right now, no, I do not. But yes,
Damn it, lackeys, do your job.
A deaf man can be a great warrior, and
even the halt can ride a horse.
Right.
Some kind of cripple can tend to fire.
Yes.
Anyways, point being, the have 'em all makes mention of many different disabilities. Those people can still do stuff, and it's juxtaposed to, but who can't do anything is somebody who's dead. So the idea that there is still worth in people who don't necessarily have the best of abilities, but you'll sacrifice all of that if you end that life, like is mentioned. So again, there's a balance there, and there's never, I think, early 20th century eugenics movements are much more related to this than any kind of Viking age practice of discarding children that were too much of a burden. I think that became an issue of starvation and a lot of other circumstances. So yeah, there's no as with so many of these questions, and any of our listeners that are new to the program, one of the challenges about Asatru is you have to face willful decision making. So few of these answers are, clear cut, black and white on all of them. So many things, and there are absolutely black and whites in this world. There's good, there is evil, but there's a whole lot in between that depends upon the circumstance. No, Eric, you didn't ruin the vibe at all. I think it's a completely valid question. And, honestly, and truth is one of the, our core values. It's something that, a lot of parents have to decide, especially when we have screening procedures now that can forecast some of these things in utero. It makes some really, really tough choices for parents. And I think it's a perfectly valid question for you to ask.
Yeah, I think it even relates runically and overall with the Holy Tide. We talk about our ancestors and the caring for the bloodlines or projecting into the future, and even with Laguz and Leechcraft and the tides of the body is the blood. So it does pertain. I think I didn't see it as being abnormal or obtrusive to the flow of what we were actually talking about. It kind of synced in there in a way.
All right, next question is, and you did touch on this already, but maybe you could go a little bit more into the etymology and linguistics of it. So this takes us all the way back to Ehwaz. Ali Clausen says, it might have been mentioned. I'm coming in late. Can you talk about the etymological link between the name Ehwaz and Equus? I assume it's Proto-Aryan, but I'd like to know what you have to say. Svan, what do you have to say on that subject?
Yeah, I kind of hinted towards that absolutely earlier on. It is an interesting jump, and it shows our connectivity in language, but it's worth noting that the reconstructed names of the runes are kind of pulled like a table, mainly from 4 legs that are Germanic entirely, whether it's Gothic, Old English, Germanic, and Nordic. So there are, connections first and foremost through there. And the big one I would say is Ehwaz amongst the Goths, I think, is the first one that really holds true to that. And that word being connected to the stallion. But when we talk about just like our languages, whether it's from India to the Mediterranean to the Gauls and the Germanic people, father and mother, and those interconnections, and the words like fire and so forth, this one has it as well. And that is, again, in relation to the word equos, in relation to horses. And through movement, again, too, transference. Because I think that's another great point to bring up is those correlations between the equine or the equestrian and like the equinox, or the idea of the transference of movement through passage from starting point to ending point, a phase, if you will. Those all have those kind of proto-Indo-European, which I know is one of those classifications we didn't really talk about, I think, in the sanitized history world. We can say that, those connections. But yes, horse. Because when we think of, like, in Old Norse, Hester, or in Anglo-Saxon with the Horsa or Hegens or Heg, I always get that one wrong. Of the stallion, these don't immediately equate to that. There was also the possibility that this rune had an H, but the H was dropped, because the H has a tendency to drop in our language, or throughout Aryan languages as they have evolved. They've come back in and they stay for a while and then they drop off again. But like algaes, the focus of the sound of this rune is the Z, and algaes, of course, it's at the end, and that has prominence in Proto-Germanic quite a lot. All of the endings of words ending in AS or AZ. It would then be worth mentioning that this, of course, is focusing on the sound. And I would also like to, to point out that it's in the Elder Futhark, there are, in essence, 3 E sounds. There's a short E or a short I. There is a long E. And then this is like the diphthong E, the eh. It's a kind of an in-between sound. And, they all reside throughout the Futhark. And I think it's one of the things that a lot of people don't really encounter on, is that out of the vowel scale, there is a lot of emphasis on that, the usage of that sound. I think that's why our language has like double E's and EA, or the AI outside of German, especially with Gothic and things of older languages, is a double E sound. So I just thought linguistically it was kind of interesting how the Futhark, in essence, has 3 different E sounds, if you will, much like how the modern Icelandic has, 2 or 3 different O sounds, if you will.
Yeah, I was looking into it on the side a little bit about the etymology, and what I think is interesting is a descendant of it is also the Sanskrit akva. I may be butchering that to any of our viewers in India, but there are examples of this descending into Sanskrit, Avestan in Iran,
Oh.
and then the obvious European ones that we've explored. So, yeah, there's that. Next up, is there an argument to be made about tying Laguz to Danu, the goddess after whom many rivers are named? Svan?
So that is an interesting point. The connection of Danu seems to be predominantly through the Gaulish people. We have the name Danube, and again, I think our intermittence with the Gauls and the Germanics. But it is worth noting that also with the Dnieper or the Dnieper River, and also the Gothic name for the Lord of Rivers, also is Donwas, and it is mentioned when the I forgot the Gothic king's name right off the top of my head right now, but he seeks to create a peace with the another Germanic tribe, and what he does is he decides that he will the Lord of Peace, the god of the rivers, Danwas, is going to preside over the oath, and so they meet on a boat in the center of the what is theorized the Danube River. So that gendering of the river amongst the Celts, and I would argue, like certainly amongst the Goths, Danwas was seen as masculine. He was the lord of the rivers. He was the lord of peace. He was the lord of riches, and it was believed that his daughters were the Udinis, the water spirits, and that there may be correlations to the daughters of Njordr, as well as again another reference of 9 waves with Ire and Ron or Raun, but that bringing back to the understanding of the Lord of Rivers, that Njordr, seeing him as also a lord of not just estuaries and lagoons and the shore, but also of the rivers themselves as our ancestors. That was their first real introduction with traveling or passage through water, was through sacred rivers or through great rivers. That's why the 14 rivers that are in the middle world are mentioned in the Grimnismal are all correlated to netting and fishing and traversing and battle and of nations of people utilizing them. I don't know. I would suggest too that if you have any true interest in that, look up Donwas. I believe it's Donws or Was, in relation to the Gutans or the Goths and the god of the river. And I did a pretty extensive study on that before going down to Njordshov. And the reason why we incorporated the Bronze Age trident in the mural at Njordshov. I know a lot of people were like, oh, wait a minute, that's Roman or that's Greek, but the actual trident that I pulled a picture from was a Bronze Age trident from the Black Sea north and westward near what is now Ukraine. So there is I think a lot lost in between the migration periods and the finalizing times of the Northmen or the Viking Age, if you will. And I can't speak too much about Danu as from a Gaulish standpoint, but I can speak in relation to Njordr, Lord of Waters. And I do see that there is a connection there in particular with health and vitality. But this rune also has a lot of connections to the well springs and to the cauldrons and to the horns and to liquid as a transference of speech when we speak over the horn to the gods or to our ancestors, and then give that horn over, pouring it into the Laut bowl. That, I think, this rune has a great connection to, as well as the sprinkling of the aspergement of sacred fluid. So it's all in there, and it's very, very broad, because again, this is one of those runes that doesn't have finite meaning, and it is like trying to nail down a puddle, in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way of looking at it, but it is true. It's the rune of water, and it's hard to define. But yes, there are many sacred rivers, and I would say this rune is about water, rivers, vitality, and both travel and what you can gain, how important the rivers were to our people.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think it's a perfectly valid association with Laguz.
I also wanted to bring up the association. Some people have theorized that Donwas and Danu might have been Central European or Eastern European names for Njord and Nerthus before, like, say, Tacitus was in his remarks in Germania, that perhaps they were the names of the twinning of the kind of water and land by the water associations with these divine beings.
Next question, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this question because this is something that I think, much to our detriment, a lot of our people spend a lot of time purity spiraling on. So the question, what are some ways to tell if someone is Semitic? It's still very hard for me to tell sometimes. I recently found out some actors I grew up watching, like Jonah Hill, is Jewish, but he looks white. Is it possible the Semites have some European DNA mixed with the Middle Eastern DNA that could explain why they look like us? So first, yeah, that's absolutely why. There are some, so here's the thing, and there's a wide spectrum, and you're going to find a lot of purists out there that have a very hard stance on this for a number of embedded reasons. But yeah, ancient Hebrew tribesmen look like ancient Hebrew tribesmen. They probably look very, very similar to other Semitic peoples, like Arabs and other people in that region that share a common ancestry. The reason that a lot of Jewish actors and folks in Hollywood and in the Western world look like white people is because the vast majority of their ancestors probably are, because they came from relatively small core populations of Jewish people that migrated to Europe and then mated with successive generations of white people for a very long time in Eastern Europe. But you have a wide array of people. You have completely non-Jewish white people today that convert to Judaism and become first-generation Jews, for that matter. So there's a lot of reasons for that and reasons to consider. I don't think you should spend a lot of your time trying to, bust out skull calipers and determine who you think might or might not have some degree of Jewishness. One of the things is, I think that you very commonly are able to recognize your own, at least to a very significant degree. And I think you drive yourself crazy trying to thresh out very small nuances that don't necessarily have a great deal of relevance. again, there's a lot of people probably listening to this program that have very, very strong views on percentages and a lot of things. There's a whole lot of cultural baggage there that different people deal with to different degrees of the other or have strong opinions on. And that's whatever, but that's one of the reasons that you don't see a difference with some people that are Jewish. Their ancestry is not readily apparent to them because that population of Jewish people was likely intermixed in Europe for a very, very long time. And like I said, I really don't want us to spend a lot of time on that because that's something that our people spend a whole lot of time spiraling about. That's very seldom productive. But I do want to treat all these questions as being, good intended, and I want to answer them. But it's not something I want to obsess over. This is another question. I don't know. We're going to take this as. I'm just going to take it as it is. Svan, we have a question from Bob Johnson. Who is Odin?
Oh.
If you had to, without the, we could do and have done an entire episode on this, but in the most accessible way that you could, if you had to tell somebody who had no familiarity with our faith or with anything about our lore or whatever, if you were to tell a Martian who is Odin, what would you say?
Oh, wow. That's good. I like that one. I would say that again, the benefit of speaking to a Martian versus, say, perhaps a Christian is because of the complete different outlook of divinity. So I don't have to premise. First of all, we look at the divine in multiplicity as opposed to seeing. I can forego all that and say simply thus: we believe that the divine powers of the gods exist in a place above and descending into the material, and of them, the highest and the leading power is a god named that we call Odin. He is known by many names, whether it is Wotan or Votan or Vodhanas or Wodhanas. The linguistics of his name has been carried with our people for a very long time, and he has even more title names or Haiti that we speak often of in relation to components within his dynamicism. He is a lord of dynamic movement and consciousness throughout all of the worlds. He is and has the ability to interact without boundary by almost seemingly riding the currents or laws and structures of divine cosmos. He has the ability to interact with all forces that move in and out, but with intended purpose of maintaining order inside dissipative chaos. So he is the Lord of consciousness and mysteries, and is a dynamic emblem of, I would say, three moving parts of what we would call a tripartite. He is a tripartite within himself, as this again lends in symbolic language of our faith and in our stories, his ability to move within and throughout and interacting both with humanity and with the spirits of other, again, multiple sources, whether it's the Jotun or the Vanir, or even those that are lost beyond time and beyond the veil, in what we would say like in the dead land, or in the land lower, the shrouded land of Helgard. He is the chooser of the souls of might that are to be brought into the heavenly abode in order to help the gods of order fight against the forces of dissipation and chaos. and he is the holder of mysteries, the inner workings and the knowledge of those forces that he is able to ride or able to flow with, whether it be like on a boat or on a horse, taking those pathways. He has that ability. And so he is a very important God. And he is so pivotal in the movement forward of our spiritual growth as a people, that he is and has been initiating us into a greater consciousness that is drawing us back together, reuniting our people as we have been separated over time. And now we are like cordage making a rope again through his divine will and manifestation. That's a tough one. I could go on and on and on and on and on, but
no, we could talk for literally, we could and have talked for hours about who Odin is. Odin is the chief god of our pantheon. He is the father of the gods. He is a god of magic, of kings, of warriors. He travels between the worlds, and his name means the master of ecstatic frenzy, the master of inspiration. He is the God that inspires and empowers, and he is the God that spoke to our founder, Stephen McNallen, way back in 1968, and has seen us through with his blessings up to and including today. So that is who the All-Father Odin is to us in the most short possible way. Our next question, is there something akin to karma? That's a question we got from Odyssey. Thank you to everyone who's listening to us live on Odyssey. We appreciate you guys, and it's good to have a question. Svan, what would you say is our closest, cognate to karma?
Well, and I think we covered that in a Victory Never Sleeps before, in relation to the explaining of what weird, WYRD, weird, and Orlaw, and the idea of the layers of deeds that are committed versus the perhaps the repercussions of action, or the interaction of all actions, if you will. If everyone is committed to movement and acting, then these actions will eventually intertwine or collide or coalesce or even juxtapose to each other and create movement and conflict. And from those ripples and from those effects, there is a kind of a set vibrational movement through that could be interpreted as fate, or as perhaps destiny, or maybe the willful manifestation of karma as it slowly comes about. And we talk a lot about action in relation to our weird and our Orlog. So that would be in essence kind of our equivalency of Dharma, whether we're talking about from an individual standpoint or from even the actions of the gods in relation to the effects of all of those actions coming and bearing fruit through that resonance. In essence, movement and our deeds create more of those actions and deeds. I think one of the interesting ways that somebody talked about it was, if you find yourself on a horse, you may injure yourself by falling off, or if you find yourself on a boat, most often you might find yourself wet. The idea is that we build our life towards living and doing certain things, and in an essence, we then find ourselves inundated by others and their actions, and that leads us into pathways that reflect our choices, our deeds, and our movements. We do believe that you can change through drastic action, through great deed, heroism, that you can move yourself through, I guess, correct or righteous action and pull yourself in another direction. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's entirely seen as you are doomed, and so therefore you shouldn't try. I don't think that has a place in our faith, but that if you continue down a path, you will then find yourself surrounded by the path itself eventually. So it is greatly placed upon the deeds you commit now and where you will find yourself and how you will find yourself surrounded by others in that direction. So if you commit to noble action and find yourself around noble people and you elevate yourself and others, they will elevate you and you will move forward. If you enter a life of degeneracy and destitution, you will end up finding yourself in those places, and it takes a greater amount of effort to pull yourself away from that pathway, if you will. And if you're talking about, say, karma in the sense of reincarnation, our understanding of death is that it's not a one for one. You don't pass away and simply come back out in as someone else or something else, but that there is connectivity in your bloodline to your ancestors and to your descendants, and that you have the ability to aid them from beyond the veil, or that you can be elevated as guardianship over those folk who may even extend beyond just your immediate family, but to your great grand siblings of your grandparents and their descendants, and how they have spread from there. So that's an interesting segue into the possibilities of karma and an afterlife or reincarnation. I think that's another thing that we've kind of touched on in another VNS. But if we're talking about life now here, it is about your layered deeds and where you might end up.
So, I would condense a lot of that into just saying, in your current life, karmic things would relate best and also true to the idea of the tapestry of weird that is woven by the Norns and by your actions. And your actions so often dictate the eventualities and the things that happen through their implications. There's a lot of cause and effect that is there that have that tend to have a karmic effect, even if it seems like just a common sense, cause and effect relationship. It exists on a metaphysical plane in the web of weird. As far as your actions affecting a future generation, that's Orlog, and that's kind of the hand that you're dealt at birth, and that's something that affects your children or your grandchildren. They carry a certain amount of, they're dealt a hand based on the line of people they come from, and that's their starting point. And they can start, very blessed and squander it all. They can start very impoverished by that sort of an Orlog debt and make themselves into a hero and ascend. But it's a starting point and a starting hand. And I think that's the closest relationship and exactly what you're talking about. Do either of you have any favorite comedians? And do you like dark comedy? I don't like comedy. I say that. When comedy sneaks up on me, I can absolutely find it hilarious, but I would never seek out a comedy. When I look at, on Amazon Prime or whatever else, when I'm going through, I immediately delete all of the comedies off of my movies I might like. I would never choose to watch a comedy. I am anti-comedies in concept. But again, when I find myself exposed to one through circumstance, they can often be hilarious. But I would certainly never seek one out. Nor do I have any particular favorite comedians. Svan, do you have a favorite comedian, and do you like dark comedies?
Yes, I think during the 90s, I remember having uh, a tape cassette. Oh, I'm dating myself really bad here. I had a tape cassette. I think it was 3 tapes of Dennis Leary. And in that time frame, he was a much more brash. I think age and general kind of he's grown soft over the years in a lot of ways. He was much more harsh and dark back then. And I remember listening to that when I was in my teenage years. And I could pretty much memorize that entire show that he did that, made him famous about like NyQuil and all of the, for people who know, if I'm mentioning NyQuil or Jim Henson and Elvis, you'll get what I'm talking about. For those who don't know, it's worth giving a listen to. He was in his prime back then. But over time, I haven't really paid attention to a lot of comics. Occasionally, I see, a glimmer from whether it's like Bill Burr or Dave Chappelle, but then it kind of turns back towards kind of placating the mob in a lot of ways. Especially like I remember Dave Chappelle kind of really hitting some hard things because he was getting mobbed by the transvestite community for some of his jokes. And I don't know the whole details of it, but I was really surprised at the level of which he was, hitting some of these jokes on the ultra sensitive crowd. But outside of that, I mean, dark comedies, I've taken some enjoyment in watching movies that have a dark comedic humor to them. I think the latest one that I watched was The Wolf of Snow Hollow, and it's kind of an odd. I wouldn't even say it's super comedic, but it is kind of filled with a certain sense of dark humor. But I really haven't, especially having kids. It's hard to allocate that time to watch movies that have more of a adult themes to them when you have a 3-year-old, 4-year-old. So you end up only occasionally they're like islands in long spans of Baby Shark and all whatever manner of entertainment that the kids are into at the time that you've heard a billion times. So I end up spending a lot more time focusing on perhaps reading or trying to do projects or working and fixing up the house and things like that. But I did when I was in my 20s and 30s and in teenage years. I find comedy funny.
I like spontaneous comedy. I'm not anti-humor. It just, when I go into the whole, like, they plan this, I'm like, all right, take one. Nope, not funny enough. Say it with a funny accent this time. Take 2. Okay, let's really go. The planned element and the staged element of it take away a lot of the humor to me. And that's not really what I watch movies for. I can't immerse myself in it, I guess is what I would say. If, again, the comedies that I find funny are when I just happen to stumble into them and funny things assail me. Like, I will laugh when they're funny, but I wouldn't seek them out because the idea of like the scripted comedy is absurd to me. It's like I worked at, I worked in the bar industry for a time, and we have these comics. And when first time I'd hear their set, it was hilarious. But then when they were playing for multiple nights, I'm like, I've heard this joke. Your audience interaction is all planned and staged. It became much, much less funny to me. We have some people doing the little tri-horn spinny thing. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Nick's feeding them to me. I think that's a $1 donation. The Dollar Train, choo choo, all aboard. And then from Balbo Biggins with another $1. Where's this ride going? So it's a wild ride. This ride kind of goes wherever this crazy audience takes us. And this is where it is taking us next.
I would like to say one sketch comedy group that I really do enjoy is YKUK, the Whitest Kids You Know. Unfortunately, they're the head of the sketch comedy group had recently passed away, I believe last year. But that comedy sketch group, and I find sketch comedy to be, again, kind of improvised as they're going along. I know they can edit it and do all that kind of things, but they do seem to take it in one take. And that sketch comedy group was definitely known for not caring about perhaps people's feelings or whatever would be correct by the political party, if you will. And they really just rode some of the more taboo topics in a way, in a very funny way. So I would mention that. That's one group I've been able to watch even all the way back. YKUK.
Right, so our next question: could Jonah Hill join the Asatru Folk Assembly? No, and for a couple of reasons. First, no insult to the guy who asked the previous question, but I don't think he's even borderline close. I think he's a very obvious example of a Hebrew gentleman. And secondly, he's proudly so. If you are a practitioner of another faith, you can't join the AFA. But getting to the meat of your question, no, I think he's an obvious example that we all recognize as the stereotypically featured American Jewish man. And I think we all understand that. And as such, he has his own ethnic faith that he is certainly very aware of. I don't know if he practices or he does not, but that's obviously his situation, and that one is the very obvious one. The other thing, it's not, yes, when it's obvious, certainly we make that call. If people somehow trick us and try to slip in, it's not our job to try to root that out. That's not what our entire focus is. I know we have a lot of circles that we run into that are more concerned with that than others, but yeah, we take people on good faith when they approach us. We don't ask for DNA reports or things that way. That's not what we're in the business of doing. We got a beer bottles clanking thing. So let me look over here and see what Nick tells me that is.
Baby Shark.
Baby Shark, $5. So, okay, funny note. My daughter not getting the humor in this because she's 3 and she probably started doing this when she was 2. And my wife and I couldn't figure this out for a while, but she kept calling stuff doo-doo that was not doo-doo. So, no, it's the doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. So she would call anything that is a fish or a shark or a whale or any aquatic animal with fins is a doo-doo. And that's hilarious. And I still chuckle every time. I'm chuckling saying it. So there you go. She always, and now it's every day she wants to watch Halloween doo-doo because there's some kind of cartoon Baby Shark version where they're wearing Halloween costumes, and so she's in a festive mood. What else we got here? Who is your favorite wrestler, Matt? Or favorite match? So this is a loaded question. It's one of those things that I don't think. Okay, so again, I'm 42. My favorite wrestler is Hulk Hogan. It always was. I was right in the midst of Hulkamania when I was a kid. I got to see him wrestle. He was wrestling Earthquake when I saw him in person in Anchorage in 1990. And that was really cool. You know, as I've grown older, there are many other wrestlers that I'm super big, fan of, or that were extremely entertaining, and I like quite a great deal. One of them is Vader.
The latest
Vader was
one that
awesome.
I watched was
Leon White, known as Vader. Super cool when he had his big like mastodon smoking helmet. That's super cool. He was a giant 400-pound dude, but he could get up on the top rope and do a moonsault. And he was just a tough dude. So I'm certainly a Vader fan. Trying to think of favorite matches. One match that I always really, really liked, and I think stands the test of time, was fun to watch, was what I think it was WrestleMania 7 with the Macho Man versus the Ultimate Warrior. I really liked that match. I think it was really cool. It stood the test of time. Because I watched it fairly recently and I thought it was pretty cool.
I like how I was glazed over on that question. Like they just went straight to you.
It's so fun. Do you have a favorite wrestler or a favorite match? Let's include you.
Yes, I do actually.
Let's include you.
I grew up at like around the same time. Obviously, we were about the same age, and
but you were over there eating that rotten shark.
No, I was here during Hulkamania. I remember, but yeah, Roddy Piper was my favorite wrestler, and then also the British Bulldogs. When we were talking about tag team, like and the Road Warriors, those were like two of my favorite. I always liked that. Of course, the Four Horsemen. Arn Anderson but my favorite match I would have to say is anything with Mankind in it. That guy was insane. The level of damage he put his body through was just scary. Like to a point where I was blown away watching the matches, and I just remember thinking to myself like, oh, this guy's gonna die. He's gonna absolutely tacks and tables and all of that stuff just blew me away when I was growing up.
I have to agree with that. Those matches are pretty amazing just to see what that dude would go through and live through. The Road Warriors, Legion of Doom, they're the best tag team ever, but there's not even an argument. Best tag team of all time. They looked awesome. They were just two legitimate tough dudes, and their the spiked shoulder pads. I was so upset I could not. My dad would not get me a pair of those when we went to wrestling. They were very overpriced. The little like foam ones. I wanted one so bad because they were amazing. Really cool matches to watch were in Japan when Vader would be in a 6-man tag with the Road Warriors versus 3 Japanese dudes. And it's just 3 giant, brutal Americans laying waste to these 3 Japanese guys, and that's always pretty cool. But with that question, we're going to call it a night, and it's been 3 hours. But that's a nice amount of time for Svan and I appreciate you guys allowing us to get a little bit of sleep this evening. Yeah. So hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA. And I know one thing that doesn't sleep: victory never sleeps. Until next time, guys.
Good night.